Good afternoon, and welcome to the second edition of the Better Business Bureau Wednesday event series presented by PNC Bank. My name is Shane Print, and I serve as Senior Vice President and Corporate Banking Group Manager for PNC here in Chicago. I have the privilege of kicking off today's event, which is focused on how businesses can rebuild for resilience. Over the last 3 months, the pandemic has reshaped the current operating environment and the economic landscape, no doubt causing a paradigm shift for all of us as we think about navigating through the balance of 2020 and beyond. From contactless payments and heightened cybersecurity concerns to simple steps on how to reopen, the next phase is one of adaptation and agility. As a Main Street bank, PNC takes pride in being an active member of the communities we serve. Community involvement is at the heart of our civic engagement and an extension of our commitment to look out for the best interests of all of our stakeholders. During this unprecedented time, that commitment becomes even more important, especially for small and medium-sized businesses affected by the pandemic. PNC has enjoyed a long-standing partnership with the Better Business Bureau, and I have personally enjoyed serving on its board of directors for the last 4 years. Recently, in partnership with Steve Burness and team, we embarked on a new collaboration through our local Diversity and Inclusion Council to roll out an educational series that would benefit business owners. We chose the theme Whensday, spelled with an H, because the purpose of this effort is to inspire business owners to help drive and grow their business. Make this day, today, Whensday, the day you make things happen. In 2019, PNC provided financial resource and investment of over $372 million with diverse and small to medium-sized businesses. And we continue to accelerate those efforts to promote and support diversity in the marketplace. Now, I'd like to welcome my good friend, Steve Burness, President and CEO of the Better Business Bureau for Chicago and Northern Illinois. Steve?
Thank you, Shane. Wow, we're greatly excited today. We have a great event planned for everybody today. Really want to take this opportunity to personally thank for PNC Bank for partnering with us today on this event. We truly greatly appreciate the relationship we have with PNC Bank, and thank you for joining us today and for serving on our board of directors. The Better Business Bureau, as you know, is a nonprofit organization that strives to find any way we can to help businesses become better. It is the core of our mission to help connect people to businesses they can trust and to help provide value to thousands of BBB business owners and the communities they serve. We're in a great place today to help accomplish all these goals. We have some great financial minds to talk about the markets, small business lending, as well as the City of Chicago's Chief Small Business Officer, who has her finger on the pulse of reopening plans and services for all of our business owners. Just some quick instructions for today's webinars. Attendees can communicate with our panelists at any time by using the control box window and opening the question pane. Simply type your question in the box and hit submit, and our panelists will do the best to answer as many of these questions as they possibly can during the question and answer session later on in this program. Also within the same control box, we've included resources as a PDF attachment so you can download it in the handout pane. This webinar is also being recorded, and each of our attendees will receive an email in a few days with the link to the recording. And finally, please complete the survey at the end of the webcast so we can continue to improve and make our next event even bigger and better. Survey results will be discussed internally, and nothing will be out in the public knowledge. Let's start up this great panel. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator. Carol Roth is the creator of the Future File Legacy Planning System, recovering investment banker, investor, entrepreneur, business advisor, national media personality, and author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Entrepreneur Equation. Carol plays herself on a TV weekly, having been a reality TV show judge for Mark Burnett's America's Greatest Makers on TBS Media. And she's a contributor to a variety of national outlets and a host of Microsoft Office Small Business Academy. Carol is currently the host of the Roth Effect podcast and is a weekly panelist on Fox Business Bulls and Bears show, or where she sleeps. Carol is also a former public company director and sits on many private boards as well. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce you, Carol. Thank you, Carol. Please take it away.
All right, welcome everyone. As Steve said, I'm Carol Roth. I am thrilled to be here to moderate this very important discussion on behalf of the BBB Chicago and Northern Illinois, presented by PNC Bank. Now, normally this is where I would look into the audience and see if I recognize you, and we would all give each other a knowing smile and nod. Obviously, that's really hard to do, but feel free to go ahead now and smile and nod and do so as often as you would like during the panel. And whether you have attended a BBB Chicago event before, if this is your first one, if you have been stuck inside for so long that you have absolutely no idea where you are anymore, we are still thrilled that you chose to join us today. Now, obviously, we are amidst one of the most historic economic times. We are dealing with very serious issues that affect everyone, but disproportionately small and medium-sized businesses. So we really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion today. As Steve said, that little bit of housekeeping, if you want to communicate with the panel, just go to your mission control box on the side of your computer, type that in, and we will leave questions or time for questions, as many as we can take at the end of the panel. And speaking of panel, we have an incredible power panel for our discussion today. So let me briefly introduce our panelists. We have Stuart Hoffman, who is the Senior Economic Advisor for the PNC Financial Services Group, where he provides expert analysis and forecasts economic and financial trends, which we are desperately in need of today. So Stuart, thank you so much for being here. Kenya Merritt, who is the Chief Small Business Officer for the City of Chicago. She has more than 2 decades of experience in the public sector and her finger on the pulse of what's going on in Chicago. So Kenya, thank you for being here and for your service to the city. And of course, we have Chris Ward, who is the Executive Vice President and Head of Product for the Treasury Management line of businesses at PNC, with a focus on tech and modernization of payment, which is going to be core to our discussion today. So Chris, thank you for being here as well. So with that, I want to jump right into our conversation. Obviously, to say that we are in crazy and uncertain times might be the understatement of the century. And obviously, as I said, it's having a tangible economic impact across the board, but particularly on the backbone of our economy, small business. So I thought we would start with a macro discussion on the state of the economy. Stuart, obviously this is right in your wheelhouse. So what is your take on where we stand today and where you think we're headed?
All right, thank you, Carol, and welcome to everyone. It's a real pleasure to participate in this panel with the panelists and having Carol moderate. Jumping right in. The National Bureau of Economic Research stated the obvious. That's sort of the umpire of ups and downs in the economy, and said that we entered a recession in February. Who didn't know that? But they made it official. March and April were terrible months for the economy. 35 to 40 million people applying for unemployment compensation. Obviously, the virus is at shall we say, at the bottom, or is what triggered this. But I think what I've seen, and I feel better and confident about, is that the Federal Reserve, and I would say the U.S. Congress, has prevented a healthcare crisis, pandemic, from becoming a global financial crisis. The Federal Reserve has been extremely active. Just this morning, I was listening to Chairman Jay Powell testify again before, I guess today was the House, yesterday was the Senate. I won't list the innumerable things the Federal Reserve has done: lowered interest rates to zero, buying treasury bonds, buying corporate bonds, shoring up money market funds. Sort of some of the playbook they learned back in the 08-09 financial crisis that they've brought back to use and gone beyond that as well. So I think the Fed has done an outstanding job in kind of trying to stabilize the economy. You know, I heard somebody say, I won't take credit for it, the economy, you know, went down like an elevator. It's coming back up like the stairway, maybe an escalator if we get lucky. The other thing is, of course, the CARES Act. The CARES Act put a lot of money into the hands of unemployed people. The one-time payment checks and the unemployment compensation, the extra $600 a week. In fact, data we got for April was uniformly weak on anything we looked at: housing, consumer spending, industrial production. And it wasn't just the US, it was global. The one thing that went up in April was the amount of income people got. But it wasn't earned income, it wasn't from their job, it was from the well-designed CARES package. And I think now we are beginning to see, and I'll end it here, that the data we're getting from May is the economy as we've come back out of our homes cautiously and hopefully safely. Retail sales had a huge rebound in the month of May. Car sales were up, industrial production was up, housing activity was up. Now up from, near zero in the month of April. So it's going to take a long time to kind of get back to where we were. But this may be the sharpest downturn or recession we've ever seen, but we think it'll be the shortest, and that the US economy, small businesses, large businesses have begun to recover, not in terms of the levels getting back to, but in terms of the direction. And we expect that economic recovery to continue in the summer and the second half of the year and build momentum as we get into 2021. And I do think there will be another CARES package, redux before the end of July that will once again add a lot of stimulus money into the economy, especially as that other money has pretty much run out. So I'll stop there.
So Kenya, obviously Stuart has some optimism to share on that front and belief that we're going to be able to get up the stairs, even if we're a little bit out of breath in the process. Bringing the discussion, though, locally to the impact on Chicago, where do you think things stand here in Chicago, and where do you expect things to go for the rest of the year? So Kenya, we're not getting your audio. Make sure that we're unmuted there. Gotta love these technical things. All right, we have you back, Kenya?
Can you hear me okay?
We got you, go ahead.
Awesome. I was just stating that I appreciate Stuart's positivity and optimism, and I think I much prefer the escalator up rather than the stairs. So, and I think we're starting to see a little bit of that, particularly in Chicago with the resiliency of our small businesses. And so some of the data that we've been looking at and what we've been hearing from our small businesses is that the impact has been really great. As we know, for Chicago, the small businesses are the cornerstone of our economy, but also for many of our communities. Our small businesses employ many times people from within the community, and oftentimes our first jobs are with those small businesses that are in our own neighborhood. So we know the vitality and the vibrancy that small businesses bring to the city, which is why under Mayor Lightfoot's administration, it has been a priority to ensure that we're standing up programs, initiatives, and policies to help mitigate some of the loss that many of our small business owners have faced because of COVID, but then also due to the civil unrest. And so in terms of just some of the data that we've looked at, at the beginning of the Great Recession, and we've been studying the recession as well as things that have happened in 2008 and 2009, and what we saw was a disproportionate number of job loss. And so while small businesses accounted for 45% of employment, they had about 62% net job loss from 2008 and 2009. And so while we were looking at that data, some of the things that we started to think about is like, how can we stand up programs that will support small business owners to assist them with keeping people employed. So the federal government set up PPP, which we thought was absolutely amazing. But one of the things that we've discovered was that many of our small businesses, those that are in our local neighborhoods, were still falling through the cracks. And so we've stood up a small business resiliency loan fund to get hands in the pockets of entrepreneurs in a very quick way. Additionally, what we also discovered was that, in addition to our small businesses, which we always define as, the number varies, 250 or less or 100 and less, but what we were starting to see was a really huge impact on our micro businesses. So businesses with 10 employees or less. We stood up a program where we provided grants to those businesses to help cover some of their operational expenses. So again, during the Great Recession, micro businesses with fewer than 10 employees and young businesses between that 0 to 5 year mark were our most vulnerable. And so those are some of the things that we've stood up to help to mitigate some of the loss, so that the impact wouldn't be as great as what we've been seeing in other cities. And we think that it's working. To Stuart's point, again, I'm hoping that we're on an escalator back up, and that we're providing support and resources to entrepreneurs to stay afloat.
So Chris, we've got a pretty optimistic forecast going forward here from our other two panelists. Are you going to break the trend, or are you going to agree with them?
So actually, I think I'm going to agree with them. I think we can, and I'm hoping that we can get the escalator on high speed here. But, you know, I think if we look at Visa's recent 8K filing, you can get some insight in terms of card activity of what's going on in the underlying economy. So if you look at April's activity, it was down 18% compared to April of 19. But if you look at May's activity, it was down only 5%. That's a dramatic shift in terms of spend. And then if you dig deeper under the covers, you can see that debit card activity is actually up over May of last year. Now, before we do, you know, the happy dance on that, that is very symptomatic of people fleeing to cash instead of credit during stressful times. So you can go back to any recessionary activity, cash becomes king, debit is kind of a replacement for cash. And so you would normally see cash circulation up, but with all businesses closed, cash circulation can't be up. There's also the perception that cash is not clean, right? So maybe you don't want to touch the cash or exchanging that with people. So card is a little bit, you know, in essence, more sanitary, although I'm not sure that's really proven scientifically, but it makes people feel good, right? Now, with all that said, there's still some clouds on the horizon relative to business travel, for example. And that fuels airline tickets, hotels, convention centers, food and beverage, which is very important to the local economy. Chicago's a great convention city, for example, right? That's still going to be depressed and is really non-existent, really. And that's going to take a much longer time to recover. But at the end of the day, you can see that activity is really coming back online. I think we're on an escalator. I don't think we're huffing and puffing it up the steps at this point, but we still need some more exercise to get back to where we were. So we're running the marathon to get back in shape versus a little sprint.
All right, well, let's just beat this escalator analogy to death and talk about some of the obstacles to getting on the escalator, so to speak. So Kenya, locally here, what are you seeing as some of those big obstacles for small businesses in general? And as you pointed out, micro businesses perhaps having a harder time, maybe speak to them as well.
Yeah, so I think it varies, right? Like to your point, depending upon the size of the business, but also depending upon the capacity of the business owner as well. And so if you had asked me this question a couple of weeks ago, I would have said that many of the businesses would have said that they're challenged with learning how to pivot if they were a non-essential business, right? So how are they staying afloat given the drastic decrease in their revenues, and some of them experiencing revenues loss of up to 80%, right? And so the biggest challenge for many of our business owners a couple of weeks ago was, how do I sustain my business to get me towards reopening and recovery? How am I building that bridge so that I don't have to close my doors? But now we're in a reopening phase, and although it's slow, we're still there. And so what I will say, the greatest challenge that many of our business owners are now finding is, how do they implement their business model in this new reality? And so that includes, like, how do you, many of them have described it as opening again, like starting their business all over. How do you engage with your customers now, which would be very different? You have to do it in a very safe way. How do you engage with your employees and ensure that they're safe, and give them some assurance that, you know, their safety is a priority for you as an employer? The other thing that they have described as a challenge is understanding the rules and compliance with the Department of Health, whether it's the city or the state, based upon their industry, based upon their sector. And we've done some work around making sure that we're pushing out that information, that it's more than just saying we've opened on June 3rd, do it cautiously, be careful. We understand that many businesses need that very specific and detailed information about what it means for their sector. And so we've put together industry-specific guidelines that business owners can point to as they're looking to reopen their doors and hopefully get back to some normalcy.
And where can the small business owners access that information? Because obviously that's a really big helpful step that they can take right now.
Absolutely. I encourage all business owners to check out our website. It has everything related to reopening in a safe way. And that's at chicago.gov/reopening. And I believe that Carly may have put those slides into the chat so people can access that information.
Great, very important information. Chris, to build on that, what are you seeing as some of the obstacles, whether it's in Chicago or on a more national basis, that small businesses are facing right now?
Yeah, one of the big things, when you think about from a treasury perspective and managing your cash position and being able to receive payments from customers or make payments to employees or vendors, is they've been relying on checks. The unfortunate thing is checks are very efficient in the US and it's easy to do. But with no one in the office to issue checks for payments to critical suppliers or to receive payments from customers via check, and you couple that with, so you've got the COVID impact and then the civil unrest where there might have been streets blocked that prevented the post office from moving mail and moving checks, right? There's lots of things that coalesce there. So moving to electronic payments are absolutely going to accelerate. And I can give you live examples where customers who used to be writing a check, maybe putting in an express mail envelope and sending it, is now taking advantage of the first new payment system that the country has stood up in 40 years, the real-time payment system that allows you to execute a payment. And within seconds, you have a confirmation that that money's in the recipient's bank account. And that's a completely different transformative way of moving money in the country. And I think, as businesses start to come back online, as they start to come back into the office and they start to think about, hey, what do I need to do for the future, whether there's a second wave of COVID or the next pandemic or whatever, is how do I enable myself for electronic payments, both making and receiving. And I would really encourage you to spend time with your banking partners and seminars like this to understand how you can take advantage of that, because that'll build resiliency into your business and get you less reliant on cash and check.
That's an excellent point. Stuart, we have some important obstacles that have been brought to bear here. Is there anything else that you've been seeing on a national basis that has been a big obstacle for small businesses right now?
I'm sorry, was that for me, Carol?
Yes, for you, Stuart.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the Paycheck Protection Program still working out. It's been extended. It was supposed to, expire by the end of June. It's now the end of the year. So many businesses took advantage of that, although the full second tranche that was authorized by the Congress, because the first $300 billion was borrowed so fast, the Congress authorized another, I think it was another $300 billion. Not all of that has been taken down. So working through some of the rules, figuring out how you do get the forgiveness for that, get those loans and turned into grants, which is what I think, the majority, well over the majority of businesses will qualify for. Certainly in terms of other challenges, is there going to be a second wave, or maybe just the continuation of the first wave of COVID? We've seen as more places have opened up, infection rate has gone up, and hospitalization rate. Fortunately, so far, the fatality rate has not gone up. I'm talking about in the US, because actually in other parts of the world, it stayed down, and in Latin America, it seems to be going up. So, getting people to fly, getting people to go to concerts, getting people to go into restaurants. Small businesses are going to do everything they can, and larger ones for that matter, to make their customers and, of course, their employees feel safe and be safe in that environment. And that's why when we talked about, this escalator, maybe some it has been an escalator, but it hasn't been for flying. It hasn't been for restaurants, hasn't been for concerts or sporting venues where clearly social distancing is the most difficult part. So yes, some parts of the economy, and we've seen a lot of big businesses take a much larger share. I mean, think of what Amazon's share of consumer spending has been and how much it has grown. Some of the other online vendors. So that's another challenge for small businesses as well, to kind of get some of that business back, or to stop losing it to some of the giants, the Walmarts, the Amazons in the retail space, and some of the huge restaurant chains in the dining space. And as I say, if the economy does have another wave of an outbreak or a worsening of that, if the Congress doesn't, although I think they will, come up with a second or third or whatever rendition of the CARES package, a lot of those benefits on unemployment compensation are going to run out. And I think that would be a setback to the economy. So as Chairman Powell and others have warned, it's good to see the big rebound in May and probably June data from, how deeply the economy was down, but spreading that out regionally, spreading that out between large and small businesses, and between the most hard-hit industries and the hardest hit individuals in terms of getting their jobs back, it's still going to be a challenge for the whole economy, and probably greater so for small businesses across the economy, and of course those in Chicagoland as well.
Yeah, so obviously we want to help the small businesses who are watching today grab more of that share back from the big businesses. And Chris, as you mentioned, tech can be a really important catalyst for that. A lot of the bigger businesses that we're talking about are already tech enabled. So for a small business who maybe doesn't know where to get started, or who wants to add on to their tech in order to build that, incredibly resilient business going forward, what would you suggest to them?
I think there are ways to automate your treasury functions. Simple things like getting someone to print your checks on your behalf, or automating your invoice receipt, or stopping paper invoices. Offer an online method to accept payments from your customers, or use card as a method to make payments to your vendors. And your banks can help you with those options, right? You don't have to do that on your own. A lot of banks have products and services that can be private labeled for you, that sit on your website or your digital front end, or your merchant services capabilities, to make that acceptance of payments easier. In addition to that, you can, a lot of you are probably running Quicken or Sage or NetSuite, things like that, where those are already electronically connected to your bank, and you can simply do some of your banking straight from Quicken or straight from NetSuite. And it's as simple as sometimes just pressing a button and getting your balance, or pressing a button and making a payment. So, and that's the way, when you think about the tech companies and other entities like that, they're using APIs to talk to one another. The banks have worked with Quicken, Sage, NetSuite, for example, to use APIs to connect to them, to make it easier for you to do business digitally. So I think those are some trends that you're going to see. And if you just think about the COVID environment, right, and having to work remotely, a lot of banks have mobile apps that you can manage your business from. I think those are some of the things that you need to think about in your business, and put plans in place to take advantage of that, because it's all there for you to enable your business and power growth.
And Chris, I want to stay with you on that for a second, because being around small businesses as an advocate for a long time, I know that change is very difficult for small business. Obviously, they've had to go through a lot of change completely unexpectedly here, and technology can be kind of scary. So if they're listening to you and going, yes, I want to do that, I don't know what NetSuite and Quicken is, it sounds really scary. Like, who do they go to talk to make that first step and get the help to start getting them more enabled on the tech front?
Yeah, I think two places. One is you probably have somebody in your company that's familiar with how you run accounting. So in essence, Quicken, if you think about QuickBooks or doing your taxes on TurboTax, right? It's just a technology tool that you're probably using to manage your books in your business. You might not be doing that though. You might be using something from your merchant provider, like a Clover Station or something like that, that you're running your business off of. So those technologies all have capabilities to talk to the banks and talk to your banker and tell them what you have, right? And they will be able to help solution with you what's the easiest way, least expensive way, and the most efficient way for you to start taking advantage of those capabilities. It's really there to help you and enable and to make it easier for your customers to do business with you and to help you accelerate cash coming into your business, which is all very critical right now as the economy is coming and people are scared of using cash or checks or other forms of payment. Being able to do more digitally is really critical. So nothing to be afraid of. It's actually easier than you think.
Yeah, I want to underscore the point that you made. I don't think enough people use their business banker as a resource to help find other resources. They're not just there to help you with your banking and your payments. They are a great resource to connect you to whoever it is that you need. And I would say in general, everyone that I know that is in and around small businesses, and even some people who aren't, are so helpful right now. If there was any time for you to be able to take advantage of asking someone a question that you didn't have access to before, now is the time. Now is the time when people are willing to do that. So please make sure you're asking those questions. To that end, Kenya, you had brought up the fact that small business owners are shifting around their business models, trying to figure out what they can do going forward to be resilient. As Chris is talking about technology, do you think it's important for small businesses that maybe operate mostly offline or maybe completely offline to start thinking about bringing an online component or a different component to their business?
Yeah, Carol, thank you so much for that question. And I was just itching to jump in while Chris was talking. So Chris is definitely spot on in terms of back office, right? I think there are definitely ways for people to be more efficient, and just want to echo your sentiments in terms of making sure that you have an amazing relationship with your banker. And that was, very well known, when PPP was released, that many people that had that relationship with their personal business banker got a little bit of a heads up in terms of their application. So just want to put a pin in that and say that that's really important. Now, in terms of just like front office and for businesses, what we discovered when the stay-at-home order came down, and it came down really quickly from the state, and businesses had to quickly pivot. Many of our business owners did not have an online process or online platform for their goods, for their services. And so when the date happened, many had to quickly pivot and learn how to now sell or market their wares online. And so what I would say is that while we were in the midst of COVID, many business owners came up with really creative and innovative strategies in leveraging technology and leveraging an online presence to maintain, one, just let people know that they're out there, but then two, to also have a little bit of sales. And so there are a couple of business owners that I felt did an amazing job with pivoting. One business owner, she sold wine, and she would sell wine to restaurants, and she would sell wine to other establishments, and of course our restaurants were closed. So one of the things that she did that I thought was really innovative was she launched an online tasting platform. And so she would ship wine to you, and then you could sign up and register for online wine tasting, right? We're all locked in the house. We're all looking to do something really creative and fun. And so by having that platform and then being able to pivot online, she was able to, one, keep her name out there and market her business, but then also have a source of income. And so as we start to move towards reopening, I don't want our business owners to lose sight of the importance of having an online presence.
Yeah, and I think that obviously, you know, to the
Can I come in
point.
there for a second?
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I'm disappointed you didn't arrange that for this session today. We could have all been tasting wine while enjoying the great conversation. So Carol, back to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a really important point, and I think as Stuart was saying, that if there is a second or a third wave of COVID, rethinking what your business is going to be like within that scenario and incorporating things that you didn't think you were going to do before, maybe it's online tasting or whatever it is so important. Can you, before we leave you and move back to Stuart for a second, in terms of additional resources for small business owners, he mentioned PPP, which I think most people know about. Are there other sources of money and assistance that are available right now to small businesses to help them with the reopening and to make them more resilient as we move forward?
Absolutely. I would encourage people that have not applied for PPP. It's my understanding that this last round will close at the end of this month. If you have not done it, please do it. Congress has made it a little bit more flexible in terms of the repayment. And even for us, the funds that we've set up at the City of Chicago, and we've done two, and we're in the process of setting up another now. We've always encouraged people to do PPP because of the forgivable component. So in terms of other resources that are available, the city is in the process of setting up a Together Now fund. And this was in response to the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. So many of our businesses, after having been closed for 12 weeks, had experienced damage. And so, you know, they're delayed in opening. And so, of course, that's really hurting their bottom line. And so what we decided to do was to work in partnership with philanthropy and with private corporations to come up with a fund where we could provide grants to businesses that need support in reopening their doors. And so that support can happen in one of three ways, whether they need assistance with capital improvements from damage that their business has incurred, with furniture or fixtures that may have been destroyed, and even inventory loss. And so that was announced about a week ago, and we're looking to have that application available and open to businesses citywide, either later this week or early next week. So be on the lookout for that.
And Kenya, just to make sure before you leave that, in terms of where they can access it, is it the same website that we referenced previously?
So all of the information, and I'll make sure that I also put it in the chat, all of the information related to COVID resources are on our website. And so this we'll make sure that people have access to it, but one resource or the site that we always point people to in terms of resources, whether it's access to capital or even just wanting to know what's happening in terms of data and trends of COVID cases for Chicago, that website is chicago.gov. And you can get everything related to coronavirus as well as our programs on that website. And then just really quickly, the other thing that we're continuing to explore is how do we provide ongoing support for businesses that we know will be impacted for up to 18 months. And so the city is currently looking at measures for how do we do that and a little bit of a longer term strategy.
All right, so guys, keep checking the website because obviously the city is on top of this. They know what's going on and they're providing fantastic resources. So that's very helpful, Kenya. Before we move to Q&A, Stuart and Chris, any other money or assistance that small business owners should know of right now? Stuart, do you have any resources that they should be thinking about? We're missing Stuart, so let's go to Chris. We'll come back to Stuart. Chris?
Yeah.
No worries. Listen, I think one of the things that is unfortunate is fraud has not taken a holiday.
Yeah.
And you need to be thinking about fraud and spend time with your staff, continuing to educate them on the fraud vectors that are occurring. This is another great example of banks routinely put on fraud seminars on how to protect yourself from fraud, and unfortunately, we continue to see fraud, business email compromise, simple things where they say, "Hey, due to COVID, I needed to change my address where to mail my check, or my account number where to send my pay, or and it's a fraud, right?" And so you've got to, use out-of-band services and call somebody that you actually know to verify, is this really authentic? Is this really a legitimate request? Remind your people that the owner of the business or a senior person in the business isn't just going to randomly email you and say, send $1 million here. It's just that just doesn't happen, right? But unfortunately, people fall a victim to that, and if your bank calls and says, hey, like, this doesn't look right, don't say go ahead and send it. Like, hang up the phone and think about it for a little bit and talk to like people you trust and say, hey, is this really a legitimate transaction, before I call the bank back and say, yeah, let it go. Because there's lots of tears sometimes when people send things that they shouldn't send. And there's great services like account verification services and stuff out there that help protect you and help make sure that you're not falling victim to fraud. And it can really help your business. So, if you haven't had the fraud discussion with your staffs and your teams, have that discussion. It's like planning for, an emergency or whatever, and you get on the plane and they do the emergency demonstration, or any other thing that you might be doing in your life, where before you embark on an activity, you remind people of the risks associated and what you need to do in emergency. I really strongly encourage you to don't forget about fraud, because fraud has not taken a holiday.
Yeah, that's the ugly flip side to all the technology enablement we've been talking about. You want to use more of it to help grow your business, but you want to be smart about it. All right, we are moving along at a crazy pace. So with that, I would love to open the discussion to some questions from the audience. Again, if you haven't put it in yet and would like to do so, go ahead and we'll put it into queue. And with that, we're going to invite Troy to let us know what the first question for the panelists.
Absolutely. So our first question for our panelists is, I've been reading that up as many as 75% of employees have said that they would like to remain working from home. What are your thoughts on this business model, and how can it be made viable for other small businesses?
Chris, that sounds like that might be in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting dilemma, right? If you think about the challenges of how the world, there was actually a big shift to actually back to the office, right, from work from home, and so you've got to balance things, because there is, actually, I quasi understand, my parents and my in-laws now, when they don't know what day of the week it is from working from home. I quasi actually have run into the same problem, because sometimes at the beginning of COVID, I was working 7 days a week, so I had no idea what day of the week it was. Like, I was generally confused, and you hadn't left the house, and we don't have newspapers, on the front porch anymore with the day of the week, et cetera, if you think about it, from where we are today in life. So I think, there are parts of the business that it's just going to be impossible in perpetuity to work from home. As my daughter has a little bit of a condition, and we have to go see her physician on a fairly regular basis. And like he says, it's hard to do an injection via a video conference, right? So there are just some things that are going to have to go back together. So but on the flip side, back in the office with social distancing and those types of things, it's going to be difficult managing into that and getting the right balance to start off with. But I think most businesses probably can reflect back on, the reason we probably, if we fared pretty well through the crisis and working remotely, probably the reason we did that is because we knew everybody, and we had personal connectivity, and we knew who to call, and we knew who to connect with, right? And not having that personal relationship. And I've been spending some time with, one of the things we pride ourselves on is having an analyst program. And we've never, through the last crisis, through this one, we've kept our summer internships, et cetera. Growing that talent and diversity in the organization is really important. And having them have the experience and getting the connectivity at a personal level to help shape their careers are really important. So I think over time, you're going to have to strike the balance and get some people back into the office. And I think creativity a lot of times is spurned by standing together in front of the whiteboard, creating new capabilities or new products or new services or whatever that you might be taking to your customer. In some businesses like food, it's hard that once again, you can't cook the meal at home, right? You've got to be, a restaurant, etc. There's just so many things that you have to be in the office. I think work from home is going to be a complex problem over time to get the balance back.
Yeah, and Kenya, I'm wondering, do you know of any resources? Because I would imagine that part of the reason people want to work from home, other than the fact that they don't want to put on pants that button, is that they're scared to go back to work. And so in terms of the businesses who are thinking through, how do I manage this reopening and the social distancing and having people in the office safely and feel comfortable about that, do you have any suggestions or resources around that?
Yeah, and that's actually a really great point, right? Like, after being at home for 12 weeks and people being inundated with the news and, the daily press conferences, going back out is a little bit scary, right? And so as employers or small business owners, how do you create a culture of calm, a culture where you want people to know that they're safe, not only for your employees, but also for your consumers? And so online, again, we have, as a part of our reopening guidelines, the certification that employers can go through. And it asks very detailed questions in order to let an employer know that they are pretty safe and it's great, it's okay for them to open. And as they go through those series of questions, if they answer all of them correctly, then they get what we call a certification badge. And that certification badge, we think, will mean a lot, not only for the employer, but again, for the employees as well as the consumers to know that this employer has gone above and beyond and has taken the proper protocol to make sure that this place is safe. So we have that available again online as a part of our reopening framework. We're also providing a host of training and workshops to employers from our team. Some of the questions that people have are, can I call people back? What are the protocols if someone is sick? And a lot of that is unknown in this day in COVID. And so we're trying to make sure that people are equipped with information, that they're equipped with what they can legally do or not do, so that they can make informed decisions for their business. Did we lose Carol?
I think we might have lost her. Yes, exactly.
Oh no.
I
think we've still got her on the line. Her webcam is down. If Carol, you can hear us, turn your webcam back on. But in the meantime, I can move on to our next Q&A for our panelists. And hopefully we get our moderator back shortly. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. Our next question is, what is the best way for a brick and mortar retailer to establish an online presence that incorporates secure checkouts?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there's actually a plethora of tools out there that you can use, whether, and you have to decide, what's best for you. So first of all, you might actually have a solution that already is tracking your inventory, and they might already have an add-on that will enable you for an online store. But, don't laugh at this, but, like you've seen the commercials for GoDaddy, right? Like, so there are services like that that are really great at enabling you to develop a web presence, and comes with payment plugins that make it secure and not exposing you to undue risk associated with accepting online payments. And then the banks themselves actually have solutions. Like we have a product called Payer Express that enables customers to accept payments online. The brick and mortar presence and the ability, you have two things that you've got to solve for is, displaying your inventory on time, and then figuring out how to get the inventory shipped, and then lastly, accepting the payment for that. But there's a ton of entities out there that will help you get that up and running.
Awesome. Do we have anything to add from our other panelists? I can move on to our next question otherwise. Oh, and we've got Carol back. All right.
Yeah, that was fun. See, this is the downside of technology. I completely popped off. I got to hear the end of that question. So I guess, Troy, we have time for probably one more question.
All right. For our last question, rather, let's go with all the concern about fraud. What is the easiest way to convince your customers and clients to start paying via ACH?
Chris, obviously fraud's right in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So listen, I think there's two things. One is, you need to feel comfortable giving them your bank account information. You can also encourage them with their bank to use an account verification service that can validate what you gave them is actually your information. I do recommend that there are lots of controls banks can put on your account to prevent ACH fraud, etc. So preventing unauthorized ACH debits, etc. No different than what you might use on a check, where you give the bank, hey, I wrote this check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for $1,000. You can do the same thing with ACH, where you give instructions to the bank to say, hey, listen, I authorized the city of Chicago to come in and debit my account for the taxes I owe the city of Chicago, for example. So it's really catching on. And the other thing I would tell you is that you might just want to leapfrog ACH and go straight to real-time payments, because the other thing that's really advantageous about real-time payments is when somebody makes a real-time payment to you, the banks give a confirmation within 8 to 10 seconds that the money is actually in the account. So it's about as simple as, ordering something online and being able to pick it up, a cup of coffee or whatever. You're getting instant feedback that the transaction has successfully completed. So, leapfrog ACH and go straight to the real-time payments. The newest payment system in 40 years in the US, and I can't say enough great things about it, especially for those small businesses, for example, that going back to the wine, since we use the escalator so much, let's use the wine example. Restaurants, a lot of times when they get and a small business gets alcohol delivered, state law will require them to pay on delivery, and they might have to have cash in the restaurant or a checkbook in the restaurant. Use a real-time payment. That way, and the alcohol distributor knows immediately that the payment was made, and everybody is happy because they have electronic traceability of the movement of funds between the two entities.
Yeah, and I would say if you have a partner or a vendor or the like who's concerned about it, that's a great time to get them on a conference call with your banker, and they can probably appease some of those fears for you. Well, before we end our panel portion and hand it back to Steve to wrap up, obviously we've covered a ton of ground and topics today, but I would love for all of our panelists to leave you with one final thought, one final piece of advice on building your business for resiliency and success going forward. So we'll start with Stuart. Stuart, what would you say?
Well, of course, I'm on the macro side, but I certainly would agree with a number of things we just talked about. Being able to have a online presence in a brick and mortar retailer. I think certainly the grocery store chains and the restaurants have learned quite a lesson about how to get their clients or their diners to pick up food, move it out, how to deliver it to them. That applies to that. For those industries that are most impacted by getting people together, I really think we need a vaccine. I think we have to have some, and that's not anything that any one business can do. But until we probably all feel comfortable in flying or going to concerts or getting that close together, we've seen, and I think science will get there. That we will see a vaccine. In the meantime, I guess I would say we haven't talked much about the stock market. A lot of small companies, of course, wouldn't be able to access that. But the Fed has a Main Street lending program. So in addition to PPP, the Main Street lending as Chairman Powell says, they don't spend, they lend. But they're about to roll out a program that reaches down to small and mid-sized businesses. These are not grants, but they are liquidity, and they often work through banks. So in addition to getting money, you can get some advice.
Yeah.
And
And
work
Stuart,
that
we're
way.
running,
So
we're
I would
running
check
super
that
short
out.
on, we're running super short on time. So
Okay.
that's a great piece of advice, but I want to make sure we get to Chris and Kenya. Chris, real quickly, final piece of advice. I think we lost Chris's audio, so Kenya will hit you.
You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, got you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So just really quickly, for our small business owners, know that you're not in this alone. We understand that this has been a very challenging and unforeseen time. We have resources and people to help you. All you need to do is reach out. And Chicago is known for being the city of big shoulders, and we will get through this together.
All right, Chris, we'll try the last word to you.
Yep, no worries. So listen, you've heard probably from various media outlets, we've leapfrogged the digital transformation by 10 years. I'm not sure we've gone that far. And you can also see as the economies are opening back up, people are actually itching to get out to brick and mortar, right? So I don't think brick and mortar is dead, but as you get back to business, I think you need to be thinking about your plans as to how you're going to be basically relentless on focusing how you're going to digitize what you can and get connected digitally with your banker, with your customers, with your vendors. I think that's all very critical to the success of your business over the long term. Brick and mortar is still very needed, very important to the economy and important to your businesses, but also making sure that you have resiliency through digital is super critical.
All right, well said. We are going to have to leave it there. I know we can't hear you, but can we all give a virtual round of applause to our spectacular panelists, Kenya Merritt, Chris Ward, and Stuart Hoffman, and obviously thank the BBB Chicago and Northern Illinois and PNC Bank for making this happen. And with this, I'm going to turn the floor, or I guess in this case, it's the monitor, back over to Steve Burness to close us out here.
Carol, thank you so much for moderating today and contributing to this wonderful, great webinar. Your time and expertise is much appreciated. We're very honored that you were here with us today. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for you, Carol. Special thanks to Stuart and, of course, Chris from PNC Bank and Kenya from Business Affairs and Consumer Protection and the entire team at PNC Bank for partnering with us today, as well as Shane, as well as our board member from PNC. Special thanks to everyone for taking some time out of your busy day today to join us. We greatly appreciate it. Again, a quick reminder to please fill out the survey, and it'll be posted. This webinar is recorded, as I mentioned. We posted it on our webinar page soon at bbbwebinars.org, and you'll receive an email for those who signed up for this. And we hope you'll get to know the BBB a little bit better at bbb.org. Before you buy or hire, make sure you BBB it. This concludes our webinar for today. On behalf of the Better Business Bureau, thank you everyone and our panelists and everybody for attending today. You may now sign off. Thank you, everyone.